LinkedIn presents.
For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.
Today on the show, I've got Oded Netzer. He's the Vice Dean of Research and the Arthur J. Sandberg Professor of Business at Columbia Business School. He's also an Amazon Scholar and affiliate with the Columbia University Data Science Institute. He's a world-renowned expert in data-driven decision-making, and his award-winning research is broadly read and highly cited. He's published dozens of papers in many of the leading marketing and management science journals, but today we're going to talk about a recent book that he co-authored with two other authors, Christopher Frank and Paul Magnone, called Decisions Over Decimals. And we'll talk about what should we be thinking about in terms of decision-making and something he calls quantitative intuition, and how quantitative intuition actually is something that is highly relevant to new AI tools like ChatGPT and new careers that are being generated called prompt engineer. So much more to come, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Oded Netzer. Oded, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for hosting me.
I'm excited to get to talk about the book and what you're doing as a business school professor and much more. But before we go there, I hear that you are the son of a Holocaust survivor. And I have, as far as I know, never talked to somebody that's come from that lineage before. So tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, at my first generation college, because my father was a Holocaust survivor, was born in Germany, and then were a sequence of events somehow, and some of them luck, some of them more and good thinking of his family, eventually survived, but immigrated eventually to Israel and didn't go to college because I'm first generation college, and I took the whole first generation college very seriously and pretty much stayed in college for the rest of my life. But actually before college, my first job was not at all college related. I lived for a year in a kibbutz, and I was actually working in the chicken house in the kibbutz. Interestingly, the reason why I decided to escape from the chicken house was because the person I worked with started at some point to more look like and behave like the chicken. So I said, I better escape from this. I went to college and again, eventually stayed in a college environment pretty much since.
I love it. So I don't know much. What is a chicken house? Like, I'm not sure I completely understand what it is.
Yeah, it's this particular chicken house that was more for fertility eggs. So eggs that eventually leads to more chickens.
Yeah.
So we would pick the eggs 5 times a day. We'd go and pick the eggs from the chickens. Yeah, not a job that I would generally recommend doing for a lifetime, if you ask me. But
and then basically you're curating those eggs for future production somehow.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that's worked in the chicken house either. So that's awesome. 2 first.
Yeah, we start with 2 first. That's a good start.
I like it. Well, I know you are the Vice Dean of Research and the Arthur J. Sandberg Professor of Business at Columbia Business School. It sounds like you may have not known that you wanted to be a professor, but how did you end up, becoming a business school professor and a researcher?
Yeah, I knew I didn't want to continue working in the chicken house. That's I knew for sure. But when it came to being a professor, in fact, I would say that if you look at a typical university and a typical floor of professors, almost none of us knew when we were in college that we want to be the person on the other side of the podium, right? I mean, unlikely that you are in college. Really what you want to do is, I really want to be the person on the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, actually, the process went through working in consulting. So after college, I started working in consulting, worked for a company that did marketing research / economic type consulting. Really enjoyed it. I actually liked the job and liked the problems that we were trying to solve were really interesting problems. But what I realized is that when I was looking at the company, as I was particularly looking at the hierarchy in the company and towards the leadership of the company, it was a fairly small consulting company. I realized that I don't think I would necessarily want to be the manager of the company, because the manager did less consulting and more management of people and getting clients and bringing jobs.
Right.
And I realized I actually enjoy the consulting, but and the research aspect of things. But I'm the type of person that would want to climb the ladder wherever they are. And it wasn't clear to me that I want to climb that ladder. Realizing being in a place where I can do research and focus on solving problems and yet climbing ladders was much more in academia. I also very much enjoy teaching, and that's how I eventually ended up in academia. But I can tell that it's something that I always knew, or even as much as 3 years before I started my PhD or the path towards academia, I knew that I want to do that. Again, I think it's pretty rare that undergrads know that they want to be professors, though it does happen once in a while.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know professors a lot of times consult as well. Are you consulting as well to companies?
Yes, definitely. I split my time between Columbia and Amazon. I'm what is called an Amazon scholar. These are academics that spend some time at Amazon, working with Amazon on their problems. And so I consult for Amazon, or even more than consult. I'm spending 1 day a week at Amazon. And apart from that, a few companies that I also consult for them. It really helps us, particularly professors in the business school that are interacting with MBAs and business students, to stay on top of not just the theory, but also the practice. It's really, I find it very rewarding to combine the theory and the practice.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Well, I want to say congratulations. I know you just published or recently published Decisions Over Decimals. I want to know a little bit more about the book, like why this book and maybe why now?
Yeah, so Decisions Over Decimal, thank you. We're very excited about the book. I published this book together with a couple of partners in crime, Chris Frank at American Express and Paul Magnone at Google. So two actually practitioners, though they're also adjunct professors at Columbia. And we've been teaching for a good 7 years. We've been teaching the content of Decisions Over Decimals, a framework and set of tools that we call quantitative intuition. I'll explain a little bit more in a few minutes. But through our collective experience, Chris and Paul in the front line of business in American Express and Google previously, Deloitte, Microsoft, myself, again at Amazon and consulting, but also at this point teaching thousands of executives and executives to be, we've noticed two myths, if you will. The first myth is that people believe that they shouldn't be or afraid of approaching data because they believe that data and analyzing data and looking at data is for those who are top of the class in math, those who are the math whiz or the Excel with, or programmers and so on. And that's a myth. There are skills needed to make decisions with data, but being top of a class in math is not one of them. In fact, I often say that there are good news and bad news about the topic. I'll start with the bad news. Making decisions with data is not a choice. It's reality. We all need to make decisions with data. The good news is you don't need to be top of class in math. The second myth is what we call the certainty myth. And that relates maybe to a question of why now. With the big data, there was the whole buzz around big data in the kind of 2015, 16, and so on. We all have tons of data to make decisions with. And that led to something that we call the certainty myth. To believe that finally we'll get to the nirvana of decision making. We'll be able to make these confident, certain decisions, right? And now, a few years into availability of data, we realize that we still need to make decisions with uncertainty. Data doesn't reveal all uncertainties. We're still responsible for the decisions we are making. And that raises the question of how do we make good decision, confident decision, best decisions with limited data? Because again, as much as we have a lot of data, it's always limited when it comes to any particular decision. And what is the best way to combine the data together with your intuition and judgment? And in fact, the subtitle of the book, Decisions Over Decimal, is striking the balance between intuition and information, or again, this framework that we call quantitative intuition, leading with the decisions as opposed to leading with the decimals, leading with the data itself.
I love it. So tell me a little bit more about the quantitative intuition. How do I think about combining those two components?
Yeah, so it sounds like an oxymoron, right? Quantitative intuition. Yeah. I mean, there are left side, right side brain people. There are people who are really intuitive and people who are really nerds like me and like to look at data. But we truly believe, and we talk about it quite a bit in the book, that these are not opposites. This is not an oxymoron, quantitative and intuition. And in fact, it's the right way to go to try and combine quantitative skills together with judgment and intuition. And specifically, we talk about three pillars that fall under quantitative intuition. Three pillars, each one of them with a whole set of skills that we are talking about. The first one has to do with something we call precision questioning, the ability to ask precise questions to define the problem before you jump into the data, to make sure that you fully understand what is the problem you're solving for and what are the possible decisions to be made. Even before you start, what are the possible decisions you're likely to make? Because there is no point in collecting data for decisions that you will never make.
Right.
And in fact, we believe that the smartest person in the room is not the one that has the answers to every question, the one that raises the hand, pick me, I know the answer. It is really the person that asks really good questions, right? Think about how often we're impressed by the person that asks really good question. Wow, this was a really, really good question. In fact, if you ask me, I think we are doing job interviews, all wrong. I think that in job interviews, we are asking questions and we expect the interviewee to provide the answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you buy my argument that asking good questions is a skill, then we should be interviewing our employees for being able to ask good questions. And I don't mean the question of, tell me about the culture in the company. That's
Right.
an easy question.
Right.
I mean questions like, here is a scenario. Consulting companies sometimes do it, right?
Right.
And see what questions you ask me about that scenario. Are you asking really the questions that should be asked? So we spent quite a bit of time talking about how do we hone in on the right questions. There is a method that we call I wish, I knew, a method that helps you ask yourself when you're faced with a data journey, with an exploration, to stop for a second and ask yourself, what is it that I wish I knew in order to solve this problem? And we found that even that very simplistic, almost deceptively simple, four words or an acronym of 4 letters, IWEEK, already pushes further the discussion of honing in and collecting only the data that you really need in order to address the problem. And again, we talk about several other techniques to make sure you ask the right question. The second pillar, we call it contextual analysis, where contextual analysis relates to putting the data in context. Data without context is dangerous. And one of the reasons that we believe that people with very little quantitative skills can be really good data interrogators is because these people often have really good context. These are people who know the business, leaders in the business, know the environment. And the way they interrogate data is very different from the way a statistician interrogates data. A statistician may interrogate the data from saying, oh, why did you use this 3-letter acronym and not another 3-letter acronym, the p-values, whatever the significance level. The way a leader should interrogate data, which I believe is the more important way of interrogating data, is to look at the result and say, I don't know what you've done wrong, but this number is absolutely wrong. And I can tell you that because I know enough about the business and seen it enough times to tell you that this number is wrong. And that type of knowledge, that type of context is unlikely to sit within a data science team. It's much more likely to sit within a leadership team. So leaders should feel confident at interrogating data, and particularly from that perspective. And specifically, you want to put data in context with respect to what does it mean in an absolute level? Does it really matter, this number?
Right.
How does it compare to historical data? And how does it compare to comparables or to competitors, right? I mean, how often do we see high fives in the office, our stock is up 3%, and then someone asks, how much did the S&P go up today? And someone says 4%, right? And
right.
Suddenly the celebration looks a little bit different, right? And the last pillar, a very important pillar is a synthesis, synthesizing the information into action, moving from what's in the data, to so what does it mean, and now what are we going to do about it? Moving from the so what to the what to the now what, we spend way too much time on the what. And in the book, we have this character, this persona, we call them the Seymours of the organization. The Seymours of the organization are people who in every meeting have only one comment. Can I see more data? I mean, we can postpone any decision indefinitely by asking to see more and more and more data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we call for is, yes, interrogate the data. That's step number 2. But then at some point, you have to move to so what? What does it mean?
Mm-hmm.
And now what? What are we going to do about it? And synthesis are exactly these two steps. And these two steps, by the way, require not just analyzing the data, but pouring in judgment. And that's often uncomfortable because judgment is uncertainty. And definitely now what means decision. Decisions often means change. Again, uncomfortable. These are the things you start to feel comfortable with. How do I move from just looking at the data and tell you what's in it? And, I generally don't pay you to spit back to me what's in the table, but rather to pour judgment and tell me, what does it mean? What should we do about it? And that's the way we teach our students. That's the way we think about developing a good leader, someone who's synthesizing information towards insights and eventually actions.
Yeah. I mean, I love these three pillars in particular. And as I think about reflect on experiences I've had, it feels like, and maybe it's just the places that I've been, but there's been no lack of interrogating the data. Although I think people maybe hesitate to do that sometimes, and likely because they don't have the right context around the business to begin with. The synthesis is, I used to call analysis paralysis. I need more data, the Seymours that you talk about, or can we look at it this way? Can we look at it that way? And basically avoiding making a decision or understanding the implications. But then the precision questioning, that seems like a lot of times an overlooked step. And I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I don't think we as practitioners, as business people, spend enough time defining and framing what it is that we're trying to make a decision about.
I 100% agree. And I would go even stronger than maybe your cautious claim of you don't know if people don't spend enough time.
Right.
We don't spend enough time.
Yeah.
In fact, Albert Einstein had the famous quote where he said, "It's not that I'm smart, I just spent more time with the problem." Right? He was smart as well, but partly realizing that he needs to spend more time with the problem, but he also was much better than most of us in solving the problem.
Yeah.
But I think there are several reasons for it, right? For not spending enough time with the problem. The first is that spending time with the problems doesn't feel like working.
Yeah, right.
Analyzing data feels like working, right? Oh, we send the analyst to crunch numbers, right?
Yeah.
We tend to be jumping very fast into solution mode. We've been almost trained and conditioned to go straight into solution mode. Let's look at the data and start finding solutions. But in the book, we talk about this story of Alice in Wonderland, where Alice walks in the forest and then she gets to a fork in the forest, and then on the tree is the Cheshire Cat. So she asks the cat, she says, which way should I go, right or left? And the cat says, well, it depends where you want to go. And Alice says, I don't really care which way to go. And the cat says, well, then it doesn't matter. But Alice says, no, but I want to make sure I get somewhere eventually. And the cat says, well, walk long enough, you will get somewhere. And it is so often that we do it with data, right? We say, oh, we have all of this data. There got to be something super interesting in it. Go and analyze it, see if you can find something interesting.
Right.
That's like the analyst in Wonderland, right? We don't define the problem. We believe that the data will provide both the questions and the answers. And we believe, okay, I'm going to look in the data and then I'm going to figure out what is the question. And then I'm also going to figure out what is the answer. It is actually our responsibility to come up with a question. And then hopefully the data can provide some answers, even that is not guaranteed. The other reason, so one reason is really that it doesn't feel like working, and we want to jump straight into looking at data and into solutions. It's also hard. Thinking about problems is hard. Then actually going and as much as crunching numbers is difficult, thinking about problems is even harder. And the third dimension of it is risk. If I define the problem and then I don't find an answer, the responsibility now is on me. If I just say, if I'm Alice in Wonderland, just say, oh, let's look at the data, see if we can find something. If you don't find anything, well, it's the data, it's the analyst, it's not really me. I haven't put a stick in the ground saying this is what we are looking at, right? This is what we're looking for.
Right.
So I think it's these dimensions of it doesn't feel like work, it's hard and it's risky to define the problem, but it truly pays off to do so. It truly pays off to spend time with a problem. And in fact, a problem well thought out is half solved. By the time you really thought carefully about the problem, you mostly have solved the problem. So in fact, probably the biggest part of the book and what we spend time on is around this notion of how do we ask good questions? How do we define well the problem? And one of the things we are suggesting is working backwards from not even from the problem, but from possible decisions. Start with what are the possible decisions? Not one decision. If there is one decision, meaning if you know that you should do X, don't spend anyone's time and money on looking at data, just do it. Or
Right.
you're convinced that you should do X. But assuming that there are at least two branches for the decision, start from that and then spend your effort on these I weeks. What is it that you wish you knew in order to decide between A or B or A, B, and C? What are the possible actions you may take? So bring in even not just the problem, but actually the possible actions all the way to the start of the process.
I love that analogy. And this may be a odd thing to bring up at this point in time, but as we've seen the explosion, if you will, of people experimenting with generative AI, I'm more fascinated by the prompts that people are using than what the ChatGPT or whatever the AI of du jour is actually spitting back, because I think it's pretty interesting the different ways that we will frame what we want to look for. So I don't know if you found that interesting or not, or if I'm on an island by myself there. But
not at all. I
yeah.
fully agree with you. I am. In fact, there is a whole profession that came about starting in November, right? with ChatGPT.
Right.
It created a whole career path called prompt engineers.
I did not even know that. Okay.
Yeah, and if you think about these prompt engineers, right, and they're, by the way, they are royally paid, the ones who are good at it, at the level of any other person that would be at that level of developing these models. Focusing on how do we ask good prompts, right? And it goes straight back to QI, to quantitative intuition, precision questioning.
Yeah.
And I think that a common mistake that people make when they interact with these type of generative AI tools, that they let go after the first prompt. They ask a prompt and then they are, okay, it didn't give me the right answer, so I guess this is not a good tool. But one of the nice things about these tools relative to previous generations of the tools, or relative even to our interaction with Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant, is that it does react to the repeated queries, right? It kind of understands the previous queries and the repeated queries, and becomes better the more you focused it on what exactly you want. If it gave you the wrong, kind of went the wrong path, realign. Tell the machine, but I'm actually interested in that domain of the response. Can you tell me more about that domain of the response? Because the other one is maybe less relevant to what I asked. I think it's a great example of precision questioning. And again, a whole profession that came about, again, called prompt engineers, on how do we build and write good prompts that would get us better results. And in fact, I've seen now even iterative processes where you ask ChatGPT what questions you should ask.
Right.
So, for example, you would give it your query and you say, but I want to ask a generative AI tool for that. How would you ask it to a generative AI tool? So again, I think it's a great example. By the way, ChatGPT itself and or generative AI for that matter, actually specifically ChatGPT, one of the biggest reasons why it was such a big improvement methodologically over the previous generations that we've seen. And I spent, by the way, the last 15 years, I've spent working on textual analysis and language models. So have been working in the area for a while. And I have to say that in November, the day I opened ChatGPT, my reaction to it was the world will never be the same. I mean, it's one of these rare moments in technological innovation that I said, look, this is very different from everything we've seen. And again, if you want more of the typical consumer reaction to it, just compare it to, again, Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant. It's so much better, right?
Right. Yes. Human
level type of interaction.
Yeah.
And the main reason for it has to do with the second pillar of QI, with context. And the reason is that this GPT 3.5 was the underlying language model used for ChatGPT. It takes into account the context of 8,000 tokens. So think about tokens somewhat like words. So 8,000 tokens is, I think, around 6,000 words, because periods and so on are also tokens. And so think about like 6,000 words in order to understand the meaning of a particular word. So it understands the full context of what we talked about to understand the meaning of a word. And relative to, for example, a GPT-2, which was the previous generation to it, had a context of only 2,000 words to understand any particular word.
Wow. Okay.
And that was a huge leap in operating more similar to the way the human brain works. We are masters, humans, the human brain, we don't fully understand how, but the human brain is a master of context, of understanding context. You and I are right now talking, and if I say now the word model,
Right.
you immediately know that I don't mean the fashion type.
Yes.
I'll need to give you a really, really good clue in the context to tell you that I just moved to talk about the fashion type model, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because of the context, right? We are very good at understanding these.
Yeah.
Machines can learn, but they often need much more training data to do so. But it is really the understanding of the context, and machines are not yet as good as humans. I don't know if they'll ever become as good as the human brain in understanding context.
It'll be hard, I think, to get there. I did hear about, and I can't for the life of me remember where this is a recent publication, I guess, that has figured out how to even improve ChatGPT or the basis of it, even leapfrog where it is in terms of speed and reduction in computing power based on another piece of this. I don't think it gets to anything related to making decisions, but there is more coming, I guess, is what I would say.
100%. I mean, the improvement of these tools was unbelievable since even November.
Yeah.
What we've seen from both OpenAI, but also Google and others is amazing. And these tools will continue to improve. I mean, computers don't have, and I don't think will ever have, the same level of context that humans have with respect to any particular situation. But with enough training data, they definitely can. It's not that they can't get there. It's just that they'll always need more training data that what humans need. And I'll give you an example for that. Think about a toddler, like a 1.5-year-old, doesn't have the intelligence to speak yet. Mm-hmm. And you show them a picture in a book of a cat, and you teach them that this thing does meow. Right. And then you show them, and not a picture of it, by the way, illustration of an illustrator in a kid's book. And then you show them an illustration of a dog, and you tell them this thing does boof, right? Mm-hmm. And you show them 3-4 of these in different books. And, by about the 4th, 5th times, you take them to the street and they see a dog or they see a cat, they're going to say a meow and a woof. They can't speak yet. They don't have the intelligence to speak, but they already figured out, based on 4 or 5 observations, what is a dog and what is a cat. Even they've never seen a real one. Now they've seen for the first time a real one, and they'll be good at a 90+% accuracy of recognizing cats from dogs. Right. It took machines 2 million images coded by humans of cats and dogs to get to human level. They now get to human levels. Machines are at human levels of getting it, but it took 2 million observations. If we understood how a toddler can do it with 5 observations, of course we would have taught machines to do the same thing. Right. But we don't fully get it. We don't fully understand how the magic that we get, the difference between a dog and a cat with only 5 observations. I really love that example because it brings it home in terms of like what we don't know yet. And there's more to figure out. But man, just think about as we make leaps and bounds to actually understand ourselves, we actually might help to understand the machines as well. It's this weird symbiotic thing going on here. Correct. Well, I want to ask you, I feel like we've been talking a lot about data and making decisions. One of the things I know you focus on as well is unstructured data. And I'm curious how most of the time inside business, I think we think of quantitative structured data, revenue, sales, behaviors that we're capturing in bits and bytes. But how should we think about using unstructured data to help improve our decision making? Yeah, and as I mentioned, I spent the last 15 years on my academic research hat on looking at these sources of data. Mm-hmm. And the reality is these are the vast, vast majority of the data we have. Depending on who you ask, somewhere between 80 and 95% of the data we have doesn't come in numbers. It actually comes in words, in videos, in images, in audio. There is tremendous opportunity there. And it's only in the last good 10, 15 years that we have tools to analyze these data in a meaningful way. These data existed all along. Arguably, since the 10 Commandments were written on a stone, in unstructured data. But the use of it, the ability to analyze it at scale, is really only about 15 years old since we have the tools to really analyze this data. So the ability was to infer this data in a more systematic and scalable way that we can now do. And part of the value of it is that numbers tell you the what, but words, for example, dive to much richer set of information into the how and the emotions of people when they write, for example, a review or maybe into why things happen. Right. So there is so much more richness in this data. And we've just recently have learned how to fish from that river flow of information that is called unstructured data. We started with text, and more recently, you start seeing better and better tools also with respect to images and audio and video and so on. But these language models that we just talked about before are a great example of this, of how can we make sense out of unstructured data, meaning we have now a machine reading the entire internet,
right,
and summarizes for us everything that they've just read in a couple of sentences and in a very human-like type of language.
It's fascinating to me to think about the potential, especially as it relates to unstructured data, because in marketing, many times is about the why to better understand what we should do next, right? Not that just they're buying a lot of, the blue one versus the green one. Why is it the blue one? What else is going on that we need to know about to actually build what the next version of that blue thing should be? So it leads me down that path. And so talking about marketing, what do you feel like are some of either the types of decisions that marketers need to be driving better decisions around, either through data, unstructured or structured? Or we could also talk about some leading practices that you think of.
Yeah, let me wear now my marketing professor hat. Since this is where a lot of our audience is interested in, but also, where my passion is, of course.
Right.
So first, going back, maybe connecting, if you will, marketing with unstructured data.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest opportunities that I see when it comes to unstructured data in marketing has to do with listening to customers.
Yeah.
If you think about it, we spend billions of dollars in what we call advertising, right? Where we pay attention to the font and the celeb and the color, the background color, and everything to do around this ad, right? And billions of dollars in sending messages to consumers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the customer calls us back. They call to the call center or the chat.
Mm-hmm.
They actually want to talk to us. And what do? We send it offshore and we never listen.
Right.
This is insane. We now have the tools to listen to it. Again, there is obviously a person who's listening at that point and interacting with them, but they actually rarely works for the company. They often outsource these call centers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, often also offshores. We have now the tools to listen to what they said, listen to whether the customer mentioned the competitor, whether they mentioned the price, whether they mentioned particular features, whether they mentioned that they're about to leave the company, right?
Right.
We have so much opportunity to analyze contacts from customers back to us. So I suggest we should allocate some of the effort that we put on sending messages to customers to actually listening to what they tell us when they actually do talk to us, and make sure that we react in the right way. And again, I don't necessarily mean for the call center agents that are doing their job well. It's more, what do we do after that when we listen to these? Can we actually do something in sending now better messages to customers once we listen to what it is that they told us? More generally, when it comes to marketing and what marketeers should focus on, this is a trend that is already there. They need to think about it from a financial perspective about marketing. And when I mean financial, I actually think that a lot of marketeers think about it as a negative thing. We are being pushed to show something that is very difficult, kind of the ROI on marketing. But I actually think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to move from a cost center to a profit center. When marketing can show that it actually is a profit center, and I think it is. I really think that it is. Just for the difficulty of showing ROI, it has been more treated often as a cost center because we see the cost, but we don't necessarily evaluate the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it has to do with thinking through metrics like customer lifetime value, thinking about customers and customer centricity, but not from a necessarily a touchy-feely way, but more from understanding that the customer is always right, but understanding that customers are units of profitability. The cash flow to most companies comes from paying customers in this form or the other. And once you understand that, you realize that marketing is at the heart of the organization, making these transactions happen. And in order to do that, we need, for example, to think about aspects like, how do we retain these customers? How do we make sure that these customers are profitable? And again, I mean here profitable, by the way, the profit is for the for-profit, but in non-profit, that they're engaged. And again, still retained. We want to keep them with the company. So I think companies should pay attention to customers as assets, as unit of profitability, and do attempt then to calculate the ROI because it would shift us from thinking about how much marketing costs and what is my advertising budget to how much money I'm bringing, right? A call center should not be thought of as an operational cost, but a true opportunity to talk to your customers, right? And impact them in a positive way, both for them and for the company. Maybe another aspect that I think marketeers should be paying attention to, and particularly with Gen Z, I think that marketeers are being pushed there by Gen Z, and I think it's a good push to think carefully about opportunity for a win-win, for doing well by doing good. And I think there are several companies that are doing it, that are going in that direction and trying to identify these type of opportunities. And again, maybe going back to quantitative intuition and decisions over decimals, interrogate yourself, interrogate your customers. I don't mean necessarily interrogate them physically, but in a way of listening to what it is that they're saying,
right?
And make sure you ask questions. You constantly ask questions.
I mean, I love the examples you gave, and I'm envisioning this, mining reviews of products that are selling well to figure out what your next product is, launching that product, and then as customers come through and have the experience of either going through the sales process or using the product itself, and listening to them through that process, if you feel that they're enraged about something, bouncing that level of rage against your decision criteria and their CLV to determine what the next best offer or cure for that pain is. $1,000 future CLV value customer might get a $200 credit. A $10 future value customer may get I'm really sorry.
Right. And too many companies are rushing on, and Wall Street pushes them to do so,
right,
on the acquisition treadmill.
Yes.
Keep acquiring more and more and more customers, as opposed to focusing on retention, focusing on keeping your good customers.
Right.
You will need to run way slower on the acquisition treadmill if you're actually keeping your customers.
Right.
Just that the acquisition is very much effectual, meaning I can tell you how many customers I brought. It's very hard for me to tell you how many customers I did not lose. It's more of a counterfactual story.
Right. I think we've seen a lot of that recently in the streaming wars coming out of COVID with the great adjustment.
Right.
But yeah, that's interesting. It's very interesting. You've talked about leading practices already, but any other practices that you're like, I've seen this work really well in marketing, or I'm excited about the potential of this within marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about, by the way, incrementality. So more and more companies are thinking carefully about not just correlating, success with outcomes, with what happens before it, but truly trying to understand, was there incrementality? Did action A lead to B? And a lot of companies are, pun unintended, experimenting with experimentation, but learning how to do an A/B test, right? Rather than just looking at historical data, let's try this version and the other and see what works. And for many marketing actions, like definitely advertising and price, it's possible. It's maybe a little bit more difficult for product, unless you're a digital product, or for placement for distribution channels. But whenever possible, either conduct experiments or look for measuring the lift, measuring whether your actions truly lead to a more positive outcome. I think that marketeers should pay attention to generative AI and make sure they are in this game. This is not going away. I think it can be extremely valuable for the topic of marketing. I'm now looking into advertising and both machine learning at scale, for example, different images and taglines of display ads and how they work, as well as generating them using generative AI and comparing it to what marketeers are doing,
right,
and see whether they work better. So I think that's one aspect. The second one is paying attention to ethical issues. I think that this is another issue that will keep coming up, whether it's ethical on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on climate, and so on. Companies need to find their way there and find the right values to it. To some extent, AI forces us to write the code for what is right and wrong. Things that we have kind of let a manager do before, now we have to put them in writing because we have to write a code. So someone in Silicon Valley or Seattle needs to put the code, and someone else, hopefully not the same person who wrote the code, needs to write the ethical code that would go into the physical code that the company is writing.
I love those examples. Well, that's awesome. And My mind is spinning on on data and decisions, and I can't wait to dive deeper in another conversation in the future with you, because we're going to run out of time today. So I want to move on to ask you some series of questions I ask everyone that comes on the show. The one that I love asking the most is the first one, which is, what experience of your past defines and makes up who you are today?
So I spent some time actually traveling. I backpacked in Southeast Asia for 6 months, and then another 3 months in South America. And I have to tell you that these few months, almost a year of travel, I've learned during this period more than I've learned in any other period in my life. And I have 3 degrees.
Right.
And I learn about myself. I learn about other people, about differences between people, about society. And it was really an experience that have really shaped me to see differences, to understand where people are coming from, explore yourself to very different cultures, for example, from the one that I was raised in.
Well, what advice would you give your younger self if you're doing this all over again?
Enjoy the journey. And I don't necessarily mean just the travel. Even when you're within journeys that are less maybe explorative, it's not just about the outcome. It's not just about the goal. It's about the journey. And make sure you do enjoy the journey, learn from the journey, learn from the mistakes you make along the journey, but also just experience the journey. We are often too much focused on the goal, which maybe even goes back to a question why we don't spend enough time on the question. The journey is super important, and we spend anyway most of the time on the journey as opposed to the outcome. And once you get to the outcome, you start another journey.
Right.
So make sure you enjoy the journey.
I love that. Great advice. Well, this may be a real softball, but what topic do you think marketers need to be learning more about, or maybe something you're trying to learn more about yourself?
Yeah, I think there have been a couple of things we talked about before, but generative AI and that world, I think, is important. And again, back to how do we create a win-win? How do we create an ethical values? And again, the good news is that I think consumers are now asking us to do that, which will force companies to do it and will create more win-win opportunities when consumers are the ones that are willing to pay for it, for example.
Love it. And are there brands or companies or causes that you personally follow or you think other people should take notice of?
Yeah, maybe a few examples I would say. I mean, on customer centricity, I think that both Amazon and Google are great examples. Companies that truly put the customer at the center. To give you an example, I mean, Google.com, this is the biggest real estate on the internet.
Right.
It's an empty page. Think about how much temptation has been over the years to populate that page, and Google resisted that temptation. It's a customer wish for this page to be an empty page. So it focuses on what Google is about, a search query, right?
Right.
And if you think about Amazon, despite their size, you would not see Amazon focusing on, I don't know, a real estate project just because it makes money.
Right.
Every business they go into is a business that helps creating a better ecosystem around the customer, which I think is an example of their customer centricity. Another great example is it's a really new company. I've been using them now a few times, called Kite with a Y. It's a rental company that if you live in Manhattan, as I do, very important. We rent. I don't own a car. I live in Manhattan. They bring the car to you and take the car from you. What they did is they thought carefully about what is the biggest friction in car rental.
Right.
The biggest friction is waiting in line, not knowing how long it would take.
Right.
To actually get the car and back. This company has totally reduced the friction. The person comes to you with a car, often, by the way, with a scooter in the trunk, and then they use a scooter to go back home, and really resolve that friction. So a great example of paying attention to customer needs. And finally, maybe two examples of more of the win-win or the ethical aspects. Patagonia, I think, is a great example of a company that for years now has been truly committed to sustainability and paying back, if you will. And Kind Bars is another example. I just recently heard a talk. We gave an award to their CEO, Daniel Lubitsky. If you want to interview another son of Holocaust survivor. And this company is a company with great values and really thinking about healthy eating, even in a topic like snacks. So I really find it as a company that is true to its values.
I love it. I love those examples. A last question for you. What do you think is the largest opportunity or threat facing marketers today?
I think it's maybe ties back to things I already talked about, but staying behind with respect to Gen Z. I think that Gen Z will push companies in maybe directions that they haven't been familiar with before. Again, doing well by doing good. And I hope that companies are paying attention and going with that generation. I also hope that generation would stay with these values. And again, the second one is missing on AI. I think that companies that will miss on AI will be in trouble. I think there is way too much discussion on, is AI dangerous? How much are we fearing AI? We shouldn't be fearing an AI. We should be fearing from people who know what to do with AI versus those who stay behind.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Well, Oded, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fascinating.
Thank you for hosting me, Alan. This was a really pleasure talking to you.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me with post-production support from Sam Robertson. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe on marketingtodaypodcast.com. Tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love hearing from listeners. You can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes and links to what was discussed in the episode today, and you can search our archives. I'm Alan.